Hey everybody, Ryan here from the Breaking Bad show. Most of us in our police careers are going to make it through our career without being involved in a shooting incident. We're ready to respond if it happens, but the fact is most of us are going to make it through our careers without being involved in a shooting incident. Imagine not just being involved in one shooting incident, but being involved in multiple shooting incidents throughout our career. And that's just what happened to our guest today. Our guest today is Keith Knotek, and he's a 30-year police veteran from California. He served in several different agencies, and he retired in 2015, finishing up with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. And besides the shootings, Keith was also involved in many other tragedies and horrific incidents that really took a toll on him throughout his career. That added up until after his retirement, he hit rock bottom. And Keith does a great job of telling the story and sharing about his path to rock bottom, and then what he did to implement changes and reinvent himself and become who he is now. Keith is now a mental health advocate for police officers and first responders. He's an author. He's written a book called From Sorrow to Amazing Grace, One Cop's Journey. That book has also now been turned into a film. He also wrote a book called Gun Runner, the Mario Oliveira story, which is about the story and the journey of a police officer from Massachusetts who was shot and seriously wounded in the line of duty. I'm really excited to bring Keith to all of you today. He's got a great story. I hope you enjoy the show. This is the Breaking Bad Show. Hey everybody, I'm Ryan.
Hey everybody, I'm Chad.
Welcome back to this week's episode of the Breaking Bad Show. This week, we have the opportunity to bring to you all Keith Knotek. Welcome to the show, Keith.
Thanks for having me.
Dude, ever since I saw that the book that you wrote that we connected on, and then learned more and more about you and your life, things that you went through on the job and everything, I've been really excited to have you on the show, man.
Thanks, man. It's awesome to be here. I really appreciate it.
Keith, Ryan was telling me that, hey, we're going to have Keith on the show. And I've heard your name. It popped up on social media. I've seen some of the stuff on LinkedIn and just, we connected, you and I. But when Ryan shared some of the stories of your background with me, it's like, this happened to somebody. It's crazy. So we're going to get into all that, but take us through, where I think you're from Phoenix or in Arizona now, but where were you born? Where were you raised? Take us through the early part of your life.
Yeah, I've only been in Arizona for about 7.5 years. My wife and I moved here when I retired from law enforcement in 2015. But I was born in San Bernardino, primarily raised in Orange County, California, couple different cities, Capistrano Beach and Huntington Beach, which was a great place to grow up. I was 3 miles from the beach. As a teenager, I got my first surfboard, and before I got my driver's license, I was riding my bike with one hand on the handlebars, and in the other arm, I had my surfboard balanced, tucked in under my arm, trying not to drop that thing on my way to the beach. So it was a really great time growing up in the late 70s and early 80s. It was just an awesome time. California was a different place back then, in the 80s, especially Orange County. All of the demographics and kind of the political climate has changed since then. But man, my childhood was just fantastic. I grew up in a very safe environment. There were a lot of things to do in Orange County in general. There was the beach, the mountains were only, snow skiing was like an hour and 20-minute drive from where we were. I used to go to, my team back in the day were back when they were called the California Angels, right? None of this Los Angeles Angels of whatever, Reggie Jackson was on the team back in the day. So, it was just a good time.
Tell us about your family unit. I mean, parents, siblings, what was that like?
Yeah, my late father was a Lutheran minister. So I grew up in a traditional Christian home. My mom was a stay-at-home mom until I was about, I want to say maybe 10 or 12 years old, right around there. Then she went back into the workforce. I have an older sister. She's 8 years older than me. Hard to believe she's in her 60s now. But it was just a good, it was a good time. It was a nurturing family. We did all the traditional stuff, church on Sunday. And then, after that, we, go out to lunch or whatever. There was just an abundance of things to do. Movie theaters, miniature golf, the little Formula One race car things. I remember doing that with my dad and going to the batting cages with my dad. And, it was a good time. It really was.
So law enforcement, do you remember the first time you thought you wanted to be a police officer?
I do. I started, I was watching all the TV shows as a kid, Adam 12 was, kind of, I think I was 10 when Adam 12 was going on. I think Adam 12 went off the air in 75. So I was 10 years old when it went off the air, but I watched all the reruns and stuff. And then of course Chips, which is like really phony.
Keith, I was going to say that, you being from California, man, I used to ride around on my Power Wheel like I was Frank Poncherello, man.
That's funny. Yeah. But, I saw the uniforms, the cars, the chasing bad guys, the, driving fast, getting in pursuits. And I knew I wanted to be that. What the funny thing was, when I was really little, like maybe 5 or 6, I used to think I wanted to be a pastor like my dad. My dad was my role model, so I didn't know anything else. But once I started watching those cop shows on TV, man, that was it. I was hooked. So I broke the news to my parents when I think I was about 14. I said, hey, I think I want to go into law enforcement. And funny thing was, my mom was all for it. She said, oh, I think you have the personality for it. You'd be great. And then my dad was like, oh, it's so dangerous. Are you sure you don't want to be a pastor type of thing? I'm like, nah, that's not cool and exciting like being a cop. So I joined the Police Explorer program at my local police department, Huntington Beach PD. I think I had just turned 16 years old. Started doing the ride-alongs, learning a bunch of stuff. We'd take different classes in the Police Explorers, like report writing. I remember doing one on counterfeiting. And then firearms, I learned all about, rifling and marks and striations in the barrel, and, how a firearm works. The firing pin hits the primer ignites the powder, and so on and so forth. So it was really cool. But the icing on the cake was always going on the ride-alongs with the police officers. I saw some wild stuff, and as an impressionable kid, because I will say this, I was naive. I didn't have any life experience. I mean, I grew up in kind of like that Ozzie and Harriet home, and I didn't know about the mean, cruel world, really. And then I started going on ride-alongs with the officers and seeing, gnarly car wrecks and mangled people. I remember my first ride along. I was sitting in a black and white with my police officer that I was riding with, JB Hume, and we saw a motorcycle versus vehicle traffic collision. It happened right in front of us at the intersection. Well, he bailed out of the car and started tending to the motorcyclist who was injured really badly. He had a compound fracture on his lower leg. The bone was sticking out. And I remember seeing that. This was my first ride along. And I was like, oh, that's disgusting. I think I'll go direct traffic, So that's what I did. And on that same ride along, I watched him choke out somebody, use the carotid sleeper hold on a guy that, squared off on him. I was like, whoa. I'm like, that's interesting. But yeah, that was my pathway into the world of law enforcement at
Keith,
a very young age.
Do you feel, that's a great story. Do you feel your upbringing in the Ozzie and Harriet household, just kind of being naive, do you feel like that caused any issues in your law enforcement career, at least in the beginning, or things that maybe you weren't as resilient at because you didn't experience that as a kid?
Yeah, I think so. I think it really did. An example would be like I'd go to domestic violence calls as, I was a police officer at the age of 21, and I had hair back then and peach fuzz on my face. I looked like I stole a real policeman's uniform, So I'd go to these domestic violence calls and I'd be telling, 40 and 50-year-old guys what they should do. I wasn't married yet at the time. I had no children, and I'm telling these guys how to run their families, and it was kind of awkward. I'm sure that they looked at me like, you're just a punk kid. You don't know what you're talking about. I remember my first DUI arrest. I had a guy in the back seat, and I'm driving down the road on the way to jail. And I was a graveyard shift guy. And he asked me, hey, do you have a note from your mommy to be out this late? Yeah, true story. True story.
Wow. It's funny with the domestic violence calls that we are there to make sure somebody didn't get hurt or victimized. And if they did, to follow up with it.
Right.
Appropriately. But we all know that 90% of them, you're out there giving marital advice, relation. It's just amazing how generationally over time, that's what the expectation has been on police officers, often young kids going out there now running, DV scenes and trying to get people, set up properly. It's just amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So how many years total did you do in law enforcement?
30.
What was the first 5 to 7 years like for you?
It was all about learning. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of life experience. So, I got off to kind of an awkward start because trying to, for instance, like with some of the officer safety stuff, I had it drilled into my head never to turn your back on a traffic stop. So it, and I was used to, turning the other way and walking back to the car. So I got dinged in the FTO program, from the onset. And it's like, my FTOs instructed me to walk, either walk backwards or like do this weird sideways crab walk type of thing, with my eyes on the vehicle that I have stopped, and my hand on my pistol grip. So that was awkward. Just little things like that, and then I learned tricks of the trade, things that normal people don't think about, but like when you're on night shift, you need a flashlight, right? So, back then we carried these SL20s, Streamlight 20. That was the state of the art flashlight, better than a mag light. They were brighter, and they had the rechargeable batteries and all that. So, you stick it between your legs and you sit on it in the car. And you may think it's uncomfortable, but you get used to it. You can't possibly exit the patrol car without taking your flashlight with you. Just stuff like that. So I learned to be proactive, and just enjoyed the thrill of the hunt, especially on night shift. I was young. I was in my 20s, just the thrill of the hunt. Oh, what kind of call am I going to get in the middle of the night? Or what can I find, driving around neighborhoods, I remember going into foot pursuit of a vehicle burglary suspect, breaking into cars, and I caught him and he bolted, and I, jammed the car and parked and ran after the guy, tackled him and caught him. That was fun. That was the fun part of the job.
That is the fun part. Keith, how many shootings have you been involved in?
I've been in 3, either where I was a shooter or had been shot at, which is not, it's not the pleasant part of the job. You don't really think you're going to be involved in one. I mean, I know guys that did 30 years and they were never involved in a single shooting. After my first one, I thought, well, what are the chances of this ever happening again? And then sure enough, it happened again. And then just when I started getting comfortable, some deputies and I were pinned down by gunfire on an Indian reservation. But the first time I was shot at was in 1988. It was on a traffic stop, and it was just kind of a nothing deal. Someone took a couple of pot shots at us. I had another officer pull in behind me, and I cut my violator loose, and he drove away. But then a passing vehicle shot off a couple of rounds, and so that got our attention. But we didn't know exactly where. It happened on a really busy highway, Pacific Coast Highway in Laguna Beach. So we didn't know where the shots originated from. So it's like, okay, no harm, no foul. Nobody was hit, nobody hurt, nobody was hurt, and moved on from that.
How many years did you have on at that time?
88, I had 2.5 years.
So what were your thoughts that night? If you remember, going home, telling your parents or, whatever about this job choice you made and you're
that's a really good question. Because I wrote about that in my first book. I was married. I was a newlywed at the time, and I had a scheduled vacation the next day. My wife and I were going to drive up to San Francisco and do the tourist thing. So I was working graveyard shift that night, and the plan was the following morning, I was just going to drive straight home from work. We were going to load up the car and then get on the road. And so my first wife, Kelly, we're driving along, and we're in Los Angeles County, I remember, and we were kind of stuck in traffic. And this was in the 80s. So yeah, traffic was bad even back then, in 88. She asked me how my night was. And I said, oh, well, it was crazy. I got shot at last night. And she's like, what? I just nonchalantly mentioned it to her. And she was pissed. She was, and surprised too. She's like, what? So I told her about it, and she was like, wow. And then we went about our daily business just like nothing had happened. And then the next time, it was in 97, May 21st of 97. By that time, I had lateraled to Butte County Sheriff's Department up in Northern California. Chico is the big city there. It's a state university town, and it's just north of Sacramento, the state capital in California. And I had been promoted to sergeant about 6 months, actually it was about 5 months prior to this incident happening. But so I was learning how to do my job as a new supervisor, and still getting to know my people. And there was a domestic violence call. It was a really busy shift. So one of my deputies and we were so busy that, I'm like, oh, sure, I'll be the backup for this deputy that's going on a domestic violence call by himself. He didn't have anyone to back him because they were tied up on other calls. So he and I get to the house right about the same time. Long and the short of it is, there were a bunch of kids in the house and no adult parents. And the mom and dad, the father had threatened the mother. The information initially was that the father was armed, and then the 17-year-old son said, oh no, my dad, he doesn't have a gun, he's not armed. So it was really sketchy. All we knew is, mom and dad are on foot in the neighborhood. They left the house. Mom ran out the door and dad chased her, and they're somewhere in the neighborhood. So I put out a description of both of them. And then one of my deputies, a few blocks up from where we were, put out over the radio that he had located the male half of this domestic behind a church at 10th and Grand. Well, by that time, I was in my car driving through the neighborhood looking for the people. I was coming up to the intersection where my deputy, Randy Jennings, was. So I pulled into the parking lot, and as soon as I pulled into the lot, I see the guy take off on foot, and he's running behind this church. So I bail out of my car, and Randy's already got a head start on me. Now we're in a full-on foot chase of this guy. It was about, I can tell you, it was 9:51 p.m. So it was dark. He's running out into the darkness, out of the illumination of our high beams and spotlights. So I could barely see Randy's back in front of me as we're running. I lost sight of the suspect, and the next thing I saw was muzzle flash coming from the darkness. And now we're in a running gun battle. I see Randy go down. Obviously, Randy was hit and in distress, and the suspect was still shooting. So I knew I needed to get out of the way of the gunfire. I had no cover at all. Nothing solid that I could take cover behind. I had concealment because this field behind the church had tall, dried grass, and it was maybe 2.5 feet high. So my thought process was, I'm going to drop and I'm going to roll, and because the suspect's shooting at me. So I'm like, okay, if I roll 5 or 10 feet, he's not going to expect me to pop up over here. He's going to continue shooting where he last saw me drop. So I rolled, I heard more gunfire. And then when I popped up to see if I had a clear shot, it was eerie silence, other than all of the sirens I heard, because I put out a distress call over the radio. So I heard the sirens, coming to our aid. And I knew that Randy was hit. So I started directing the response over the radio. Long and the short of it is, a California highway patrolman and then another one of my deputies arrived on scene, and we went into the field searching for Randy and the suspect. We didn't know the condition of either. We found the suspect first, and he had multiple gunshot wounds. He was deceased. And then we found Randy's body about 10 feet away from the suspect. We looked for holes. I mean, we could see 2 holes in his uniform shirt, and we tore that open. We saw the gunshot marks on the vest, and we tore off the front panel, and the fatal round was just above the Kevlar and underneath the neckline. The round went in and down and severed Randy's aorta. We gave him CPR. I called for lifeline. He was medevaced out of there, but sadly, Randy was killed in that incident. The next one was on a traffic stop in 2002. And again, I was working night shift. I was a night shift sergeant. I made a traffic stop. This was, I had gone through a divorce. Let me just back up a moment. When that shooting in 97 happened, I was going through a divorce at the time from my first wife. So now fast forward to 2002, I had moved.
Keith, I don't mean to cut you off. I'm so sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I really want to dig in a little bit on the mindset, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
After the second shooting, you said you were already going through a divorce. I can only imagine might not have been the most optimal time for something like that to happen. And then it happened. So can you walk us through, days after that, what happened? Did that shooting affect anything else, aspect of your life?
Oh man, I was a mess. I cried a lot by myself, because by this time I had two daughters. I had a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. My ex-wife had moved back to Southern California. She moved back to Orange County with my daughters, and we shared custody of the girls. When it happened, I was by myself in my house all alone. So talk about, being lonely, sad, depressed. I went to work at 3 p.m. that day, the day of the shooting. And I didn't get home until about 8 a.m. the following morning. The shooting team, the investigators, they interviewed me. I had to go through all of that. It was just it was a horrible time. A couple deputies.
Did you talk to Kelly about that shooting? Did she, even though she wasn't living home at the time, did she?
Yeah, I called her. Actually, I called her from the scene. I had nobody else to call, so I called the mother of my daughters who was, back down in Orange County. I called from my cell phone that was cradled in my patrol car, and told her what had happened. And she drove up probably a couple days after that to be with me. And she brought our daughters. She knew Randy. She was a dispatcher for, she was previously a dispatcher for my department at the time, and then left.
How was that dynamic when she came up with the daughters to see you and be with you? You're going through a divorce, you're in this shooting. Was it comforting to you? Was it a little awkward or equal?
It was comforting and awkward at the same time, if that makes sense, because I didn't know where I stood with her. I was sort of dating somebody else by that time. The divorce was final at that time, but it's funny, I didn't call my girlfriend. I called my ex-wife.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, it was weird.
Did that affect your relationship going forward with Kelly? Was that always something that you could have a feather in your cap, even though we're not together anymore? We shared this moment together, or was it, no, it was just never really.
We always had a good relationship. We got married so young. We were just kids, neither one of us knew how to be spouses. And we had a lot of growing up and learning to do. But Kelly and I have always maintained a very amicable relationship for our daughter's sake.
Mm-hmm.
So
how about following the shooting? Any sort of symptoms you're having in 97?
Yeah.
Depression, sleeplessness?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was about to talk about that. The morning afterwards, I got home. It was like 8 a.m. My doorbell rang. I was by myself with my thoughts, And I opened the door, and two of my deputies were standing at my door, and they just looked disheveled, and I could tell they had been crying because they had the puffy eyes and everything. I invited them in. They had a bottle of Jack Daniels with them. So we sat in my living room, drank shots, and just talked about Randy. We told Randy stories, and we cried together. And then we polished off that bottle between the three of us. Those guys left, and I decided, man, I have been up for like 30 hours now. I should probably try to get some sleep. So I went in my bedroom, laid down on my bed. As soon as I was exhausted mentally, physically, I was just tapped out. I started dozing off. And as soon as I started drifting into sleep, I was awakened by gunfire in my sleep, gunfire and muzzle flash. And I woke up and started breaking a sweat. I woke up and I was like, oh man, oh, it was a dream, you know? And I couldn't get to sleep. I got out of bed and stayed up. And I think it wasn't until nighttime the following evening when I finally actually sort of kind of slept and had some broken sleep. I was off work for a week, and then someone from sheriff's admin called me and said, hey, you need to drive down to Sacramento on this date and time because you need to go to our contract departmental psychologist to get cleared to go back to work. So I did. I did that. I had a lot of time to contemplate. I had a week to think about it. I was traumatized. You know, I obviously had post-traumatic stress, but in 1997, the word post-traumatic stress or PTSD, it wasn't a common buzz phrase like it is today. It really became a thing after the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. You know, in 2001, we started hearing about it. So I didn't know what I had. I just knew that I felt awful. I felt awful, and I didn't know how to shake the feeling. I thought about, oh, should I get out of law enforcement? And I'm like, well, I had 11 and a half years to, you know, to work as a police officer. I'm not going to forfeit my whole retirement just, you know, because I was involved in a horrific incident. I'm going to, you know, I fell off the horse. I'm going to get back on that horse and ride it again and press forward. So that was the mindset I had. So I went to the departmental shrink. I was kind of anxious to get back to work because, you know, again, I'm by myself. I don't have anyone at home, and I derived my identity and my joy at the time from going to work and being with my people, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. Looking back on it, I'm big on the identity thing because I went through an identity crisis. Looking back on it, do you think, I'm sure you've had time to reflect on this, obviously, but
oh yeah,
did that identity that you had attached to your vocation, did that hinder you, help you, or was it indifferent to your recovery from the trauma?
It was probably indifferent. You know, it's not just what I did as a profession, you know, it's who I was. I was a peace officer. So I went down, I told the head shrinker, the psychologist, what he wanted to hear. It's like, let's get these boxes all ticked off, you know, and so I could be cleared and go back to work. So I put on a phony face and a phony smile and told him, yeah, you know, it was horrible. I feel horrible. I'm very sad, but I'm really anxious to get back to work. You know, it's not gonna hinder me from doing what I need to do on the job. I'm anxious to go back to work. And, you know, I was cleared. I went back to work, and I remember this because my very first day back on the job, I'm sitting in my car listening to the radio, the police radio, and the very first call of my first shift back to work was a suicidal subject that was armed with a shotgun. And I remember thinking to myself, not like I could do anything like I'm Superman, but I got on the air and I told my responding units, don't do anything, don't approach the subject until I get there. Because that's another thing I had was survivor's guilt. 3 of us ran into the field and only one of us, me, walked out alive. So I had survivor's guilt. I know I didn't cause Randy's death, but I somehow felt responsible because I lost a guy on my watch. So I told my guys, oh, do not approach this armed guy until I get there. Long and the short of it is the guy took his own life before any deputies arrived, which for us was probably a good thing. We didn't have an armed standoff with him. But yeah, I remember being very, I had an attitude of, I will not hesitate to use lethal force. I just lost one of my guys. So, the first sign of a threat, I'm going to use lethal force. So fast forward to 2002, I had laterally transferred back to an agency in Southern California because my ex-wife had moved to Southern California. She moved back to Orange County with my daughters, and I knew that I needed to be an active participant in my daughter's lives. I needed to be a dad. So I sold my house and got another job that was only about an hour away from where my daughters lived. And I was hired as a lateral police sergeant. So I'm a night shift sergeant. I stopped a vehicle for simple thing, equipment violation, headlight out. No consequence, right? Well, as I'm walking up on the vehicle, I make it to the driver's side rear quarter panel of the vehicle. I haven't even made it to the C-pillar. And I see something that looks like this coming out the window, which is the barrel first of a pistol. And because I made a habit of, when I did stops at night, I'd always light up the vehicle I had stopped with my high beams. We had a passenger side spotlight that was controlled with a switch on the center panel. And I had it like set up for nighttime traffic stops. So it would illuminate the passenger side of the vehicle. And then I would light up the driver's side of the vehicle with the driver's side spotlight. And then we had the takedown lights built into the light bar. So I had the whole thing illuminated. And then I was walking up on the car with my flashlight. In my weak hand, I had my strong hand on my pistol grip, and I saw that barrel coming out and then the whole pistol. And I didn't stick around to see what was going to happen next. So I booked it between the rear of the violator's vehicle and the front of my patrol car, and unholstered and unleashed copper and lead through the back window of the vehicle. Because I knew if I allowed him to exit, that increases the chances of him, doing harm to me. I can't let him out of the vehicle. I need to, lay down some fire. So he puts the car in drive and he leaned forward. So I didn't hit him, and he booked it. He peeled off and took off down the road. I ran behind my patrol car around to the driver's side, jumped in, put it out over the air. And by the time I put the car in drive, he was long gone. I saw taillights. Eventually we caught the guy 2 days later. He was a parole absconder who was a convicted felon in possession of a firearm. He didn't want to go back to prison. And the vehicle he was in was what we call a cold-plated stolen vehicle. He stole a plate from a currently registered vehicle and then put it on this stolen vehicle. So when I called in the plate, it just came back as the same make, a Ford.
So what was happening in your life following that third shooting?
Well, I essentially, I call that my second one. The first one was kind of a nothing deal. That second one, I was a shooter. I saw my life flash before my eyes. I had remarried by that time to my second wife. It was hard to wrap my head around it because I thought I was one and done. I thought, well, I was involved in this officer fatal involved shooting. That's it. I can cruise the rest of my career. What are the chances of, having another critical incident like this? And, I had, again, I started having like gunfire nightmares and muzzle flash and stuff like that. The ones from 97 had subsided, and I didn't seek any type of mental health help because of the stigma, right? We all know about the stigma. Mm-hmm. So I go, this guy's a sergeant, he's a train wreck. He's going to a head shrinker. I'm not going to follow this supervisor into a burning building or anything. That guy's messed up in the head. So I didn't talk about it. I just suppressed everything. But I managed to stuff back Randy's death into the far corners of my mind. And then in 2002, when this other incident occurred, everything resurfaced. It just ignited. It ignited that whole fiasco again in my mind. So I continued to work. I just sucked it up. I got cleared to go back to work. And I talked about it when I was asked about it by my guys, like it was no big deal, and promoted a couple of times. I went into the detective bureau as a detective supervisor, and then promoted a couple of times. And then my hard rank was commander at the time. So fast forward to 2004, the city of San Jacinto decided they wanted to contract with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department to provide law enforcement services for the community. There was a trend at the time because, let's face it, policing is an expensive business. It costs multi-millions of dollars to run an autonomous standalone municipal police agency. Mm-hmm. So the city council voted to disband us and to contract with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, which is the third largest sheriff's department in the state of California out of all 58 counties. So I was one of the lucky few to be hired during the transition. I was demoted to sergeant, which was great because I had less responsibility, better pay, and better retirement with the sheriff's department. And let's face it, being a sergeant is like one of the best jobs in the world. I thought I wanted to be in executive level management. I thought it was really cool. But then when my honeymoon period was over, it was just a nightmare. I was really never any good at it because, balancing the political aspect of it and then trying to carry forth the needs of my people to elected officials, it was a nightmare. So I'm like, oh, yay, I'm a sergeant again. I get to do what I love doing. So fast forward now to 2008. May actually of 2008. By this time I'm divorced from my second wife. And I go on a call with some deputies of shots fired on an Indian reservation. I don't know if you guys have tribal police in your state, but California Post doesn't recognize tribal police as state peace officers in California. So it's like either you have the federal tribal police or some type of a tribal security thing. So the Saboba Indian Reservation had security. They didn't have federal tribal police. The security people called in a report of shots fired. Deputies respond. They immediately start taking gunfire from two people. One was a female and the other was a male. One was armed with an AK-47. The other was armed with an SKS. So deputies take gunfire when they arrive on the reservation. The suspects, what they had done is they drove past the guard shack at the reservation and started shooting up the guard shack. Fortunately, no one was hit. They continued down the road southbound, and then they abandoned the vehicle and they went up to high ground on this hill type of thing. So they had a good view of, the responding units. They had high ground. They were in a position of advantage. I get there. We put out an 1199 call, which is an all call for help. So we had neighboring jurisdictions roll onto the reservation. We couldn't get close to the suspects again because they had high ground. We had our SWAT people en route. Riverside County has a very active SWAT team. It's a busy department. We had two helicopters orbiting overhead, and then we had a SWAT sniper in one of our helicopters. And they decided it would be a good idea to start shooting at our airships. So the SWAT sniper who was in one of the helicopters, Hudson Bales is his name. He got the green light. He actually took out both suspects from the air from a hovering helicopter. Wow. Which was totally unprecedented. That had never happened in the history of our department before. That was the first and last time that, lethal force was used from one of our helicopters. But we were pinned down by gunfire for like an hour and 20 minutes. It was pretty scary. I didn't put any rounds down range. I was too busy talking on the radio and directing people and trying not to get hit by indiscriminate gunfire. So that was scary. And 5 days after that incident, I married my now wife, Lily. Just like nothing had happened at all. It's like just another normal day. 5 days later, I went to my wedding, got married, went on my honeymoon.
That's amazing.
So
what was your thoughts? What were you thinking when you're responding to the scene at the Indian reservation? Like what's going through your mind?
That something bad was really going on because that Indian reservation was notorious for having multiple incidents of shooting at the police. In fact, I think it was 2 weeks prior to that, there was another shooting on the reservation where one of our deputies had killed a tribal member. So I'm thinking to myself, well, this is really bad. This is a righteous thing. This is the real deal, and my first thought was just getting there. I know the layout of the reservation because I had been on it many times on calls. So in my mind, I was just rolling through. I was listening to the radio. It's like, okay, the suspects are further south into the Indian reservation. It's like, okay, I'm going to respond. I'm going to go past the guard shack. And then, I'm going to try to break off and find cover somewhere so I don't get hit. And then we're going to try to, build up a good perimeter around these people and contain them, but we couldn't get close. because they had the high ground. So,
did you ever question your mortality? Like,
oh yeah,
or your luck? Like, why am I getting involved in so many of these situations?
I did. I didn't question why am I getting involved in these things. I knew that, it was just a very poignant reminder that law enforcement is an inherently dangerous profession. I didn't question why. I just hoped and prayed that I would live through those incidents. And I prayed each and every time I was involved in something like that. I'd throw up quick little prayers to God and then, go about my business.
Did you recognize, though, in that moment, maybe not the first couple times, but how abnormal it is for a law enforcement officer to be involved in that many incidents that you have been?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I made it to retirement, which was January of 2015. Was never involved in another shooting incident per se, but, I was involved in some critical incidents, murder, suicide calls, stabbing where a guy had kidnapped his girlfriend, and then he slit her throat and stabbed her multiple times. She was bound and gagged in the back of a van that I just happened to roll up on. Unbeknownst to me what was going on in there. So I had a lot of head noise. I really did. And I was self-medicating with alcohol by that time, just to, I didn't want to seek mental health help. So the easy fix was drinking to take off the edge. And it was effective for a while until it wasn't anymore, until it became a real problem for me.
When did it become a problem? Like, looking back, when was the
2009.
first time?
2009. It was after that stabbing I had just mentioned, because I had rolled up on it. It was in a big mall parking structure. And I had just rolled up on it. It was like an occupied vehicle check. And talk about having the conscience shocked. So I thought the guy was going to jump out and bum rush me with the knife, and I was going to shoot him. I mean, in layman's terms, that's what I thought was going to happen. But he did something completely, not what I had thought, because I didn't know there was anyone else in the van with him. And then he just started making downward stabbing motions. Unbeknownst to me at the time, there was a bound and gagged female in the back of the van.
Wow.
And anyway, we took him into custody. And that was the beginning of my decline. It's like I self-imploded. And
can you walk us through that?
Yeah,
for somebody not familiar.
Yeah, the dreams started coming back. I wasn't sleeping. We all know how important sleep is for mental health and resilience. And I wasn't sleeping. I was having nightmares. I'd freak out my wife because I'd be having these nightmares, and I'd like yell in the middle of the night, and she'd wake up and be freaked out. So I didn't have restful sleep. So I started drinking wine, and the wine kind of helped me get to sleep. And then when the wine stopped working, I switched to hard liquor because the wine just wasn't working anymore. And then pretty soon I needed more and more liquor at night to essentially pass out. And that was the cycle. That was the cycle for years. And then I made it to retirement. About a year before I retired, I made a conscious decision to try to just quit drinking cold turkey, just quit. So in 2014, I had managed to stop, and I managed to gain some sobriety. And then January of 2015, I retired. We moved to Arizona. And then, life happens, right? Like my dad died in 2018. 6 months after that, my father-in-law died, just totally unexpectedly. 2016, one of my former deputies' wives, she was a Palm Springs police officer. She was killed in the line of duty. She was shot and killed on a domestic violence call with Gil. I can't remember his last name, but the two of them were both shot and killed in the line of duty. So that weighed on my heart heavily. So I started drinking again, self-medicating. I lost a bunch of friends. One of my best friends died of colon cancer on Thanksgiving of 2017. And then my friend Dan died in April of, and he was one of my mentors. He died in April of 2019. And I didn't know how to process all of that. So I drank again and basically just self imploded.
What was the turn that second time to quit drinking and get help?
I crashed my car, and I decided, I can't live like this. Something has to change. What needs to change? Everything needs to change. People, places, and things, habits. I needed to make lifestyle changes. I needed to not let my pride interfere with my getting well. So I began seeing a psychotherapist. I went to EMDR therapy to get my post-traumatic stress treated. I started going to AA meetings for drinking cessation and then ultimately, stopping. So those were the steps I took. And then I learned about this thing called the 4 pillars of resilience, where the mental component of your life, the physical, the spiritual, and the social components comprise these 4 pillars, and they bring balance to your life. And if one of those areas gets, if you're not paying attention to all 4, when one of them gets out of whack, then your whole life loses balance. So I took a holistic approach. I really tapped into my spiritual pillar because I was raised in a Christian home. Again, my late father was a pastor. So it was easy because I had already believed in a Judeo-Christian God, it was easy for me to tap into that. Not so much for an atheist to find a higher power, if they don't believe in such a thing. But I already had that foundation, so I really tapped into that.
Keith, I know you shared a story about an incident that you had after the crash.
Mm-hmm.
It was really quite a defining moment for you.
Absolutely.
Can you share that for the listeners?
Absolutely. I call it my meeting with Jesus, although I don't know if it was Jesus. It was like a come to Jesus moment. So after the crash, my wife, needless to say, was not pleased with me. So I was sleeping in the guest room at our house, and it was like 3 a.m. I was awakened by a presence standing next to my bed. I can't really describe it to you, but I knew there was like a being standing next to my bed. And it wasn't communicating verbally with me, but it was like emitting a sense of peace to me. Like, take my hand, my son, everything's going to be okay. Wow. And I wasn't afraid. And I rolled over and I went back to sleep, and I had the best sleep of my life after that. And then when I woke up the following morning, my mind was just blazing with all of these thoughts of things that I need to change about myself, character flaws and defects. And, I realized that pride was a big issue with me. It was just weird. I became like acutely aware of the presence of God, and that I realized I needed to live my life not just for my wife and kids, but to serve others. I needed to be a living amends for all of the horrible things that I had done in the past. So I started journaling because someone said journaling is therapeutic. And I was so resistant to do it. I'm like, I'm not going to sit around and journal about my life. That's lame. And, but I started doing it. And then I'm like, yeah, it is kind of therapeutic. So I thought, okay, how did I get here to where I am now? How did I arrive at this point? I came from a relatively normal middle-class family home. I had a career in law enforcement. How did I get here? So I decided to go back from the very start, and I wrote about my birth and my family life, and then turned it into a book. I thought, I felt led to turn it into a book to tell my story. I thought if it'll help just one first responder, or anyone for that matter, it'll all be worth it. So I wrote this one, From Sorrow to Amazing Grace, One Cop's Journey. And, I actually got some behind the scenes feedback from people who read it. And they're like, oh man, your story is my story. There was a retired detective. He was a military officer. And then he went into law enforcement after the military. And he's like, yeah, essentially, I'm a clone of you. We could be, you're my brother from another mother, because your story is, not identical, but very similar to my story. And, you're the guy that gave me the inspiration to go out and get help. And I had a couple of, instances like that it was so rewarding to me.
Wow.
And then that book was turned into a film, which is streaming on Amazon Prime right now.
Oh, nice.
Called One Cop's Journey. And then I decided, life is all about learning, right? I'm still learning today. I've never claimed to know everything. So I rewrote the book and redesigned the cover. So it's kind of a military green with cinnamon brown lettering. And, I used the sheepdog emblem. That emblem I actually designed for a fellowship that another guy and I started at my church. We call it Sheepdog Fellowship. It's kind of like what Sarah Carell is doing with her group. So we started it for veterans and first responders at my church. And I see your CIB on your flag back there. So yeah. I know you were Army, Chad.
Yes, yes, sir. Yes,
sir.
Cool. Yep.
And anyway, so I rewrote that, and then Mario Oliveira contacts me out of the blue. I didn't know him. Turns out Mario and I have a mutual friend who I used to work with in Southern California. She was injured on the job in a pursuit crash, and she had to medically retire. So she moved back to Massachusetts, where her family is from. And then that's how she and Mario connected. So Mario was looking for someone to write his story. And she's like, hey, I know a guy who wrote some books and he's a retired cop. You ought to give him a call. So he reached out to me, and I was reluctant at first. I'm like, man, I'm so busy. We were about ready to start filming for this movie, this One Cop's Journey film. Like, man, I'm so busy. I got a couple of projects going on. I'm teaching part-time up at one of our state universities here in Arizona. I'm like, I don't know if I'll have the time to do it. And then Mario said, listen, just do me a favor. He says, I'm going to send you a link to a video. Watch that thing and tell me what you think. So the video was an interview with him and Dr. David King, his surgeon. Basically, it was a brief overview of Mario's story. My wife and I were bawling by the end of it. And I'm like, man, this is an amazing, powerful story. Why would I not want to be a part of such an amazing story? So I called Mario and told him I'll write his story. And then we got cracking, and and here it is. So
Hold it up.
yeah, gun runner. So we were like, well, what's a good name for Mario? Thought the name he came up with was Surviving the Unthinkable. And then the two of us were putting our collective minds together. And it's like, well, you were on a task force that was going after illegal gun runners. And it's like, what about gun runner? And then we're both like, yeah. So I did a copyright search and I'm like, oh yeah, there's one called The Gun Runner. There's one called Gun Runner, but it's not all one word. It's gun and runner. So I decided we'll just munch it together and call it Gun Runner. And that pretty much describes, it's a great title for the book.
Man. Yeah, that was an amazing book. I know I've told you, I'll share with our listeners. I read it in 2 days. I know Mario from, not personally, but I know of Mario from being in the Massachusetts area and everything. So I know that's how you and I ended up getting connected. Keith, I saw that the book was coming out about Mario, and we connected. But I'm so grateful for that, because I've got to learn your whole story and the all the amazing things that you did in your career and awful things that you dealt with and what you were able to turn that into. And I'm a firm believer of that things don't happen to us, they happen for us. And
right.
You had some of the most horrific things that can happen to a police officer all happen to you during your 30-year career. But now you look at what you're doing for others and the influence you're having to help others in their career that are dealing with the same things to get help. It's almost, you got to look at, was that the path? Did God put you through all of that to build you into who you are today to serve others now?
I think so. I didn't see it at the time. I asked why me? Why do I feel so terrible on most days? Why do I put on a fake smile and go to work? And now I can see it. But I had to become completely broken, and I had to become really transparent, because I used to hold everything so close to the vest. I didn't talk about any of this stuff. I didn't want anyone to know that I was hurting inside. I was broken. And I had to be willing to not only become broken and become transparent, but to let God work and move in my life and rebuild me into the man I am today.
I think it's so important for especially people in law enforcement. We're all former police officers and retired police officers, so we'll keep it focused on that. So important for police officers that are feeling that way to see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that they can seek help, they can change. There is happiness on the other side of that pain if we decide we're going to pursue it and work for it.
Absolutely. And I tell people this now, and it's the truth. I am living my best life today.
Incredible.
Yep. That is great.
Is awesome.
Keith, we can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I always, I say this at a lot of shows. I always wondered how Jocko could do. Jocko does sometimes 3 and 4 hour podcasts, and I know we're already over an hour here, and it's like I could go on for another hour talking and learning more about you and the things you're doing now and everything. But thank you so much for coming on the show. Usually I do a book recommendation, but Keith, we're gonna plug your books here. And guys, Gun Runner is awesome book, and I'm going out and I'm sorry, Keith, I know it's one cop's journey. What's the first part of that?
From Sorrow to Amazing Grace.
There we go, one cop's journey. So I'm definitely going out. I'm ordering that one today, and I got to read the rest of that story. And I didn't know that your film was on Amazon Prime, so that is awesome. I'll be streaming that. That's gonna be next time my wife and I watch a movie together this week. That's going to be the movie that's coming on. I'm definitely looking for that. So everyone awesome. Go out, pick up copies of Gun Runner and One Cop's Journey, and get on Amazon Prime, watch the movie. And And we're gonna wrap up quickly. Chad, if you got your questions to fire through, we like to end on the lighter side. We get into some deep conversation. We like to end on the fun side, and Chad's gonna go through his 5 questions to help us learn a little bit more about who Keith is, the man.
We are going to ask some extremely, extremely personal questions, Keith.
Okay.
Questions that you probably have never even thought of yourself. And we're going to ask you on a show to disclose. No, I'm just kidding. 5 questions. It's going to be super simple. Do you have your phone near you?
I do.
What is the last emoji that you used? Ooh.
Oh.
Question 1. Last emoji that you used.
Okay, the last emoji. Stand by. Oh, thumbs up. Thumbs up. Last night.
Last night to me, right?
Yeah.
That is funny. That is funny. All right. You are a product of the 70s, right? 70s and 80s?
Yeah.
What is your favorite decade and why? 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, whatever.
Oh, the 80s by far. The 80s was an awesome time for me because I was in high school in the early 80s, and then I went into law enforcement in the mid 80s as a youngster. So I was brand new in a career field, and I loved the music back then, and it was an amazing time. The United States was really prosperous. Politically, we were pretty solid. The 80s were just a great era. The 70s, not so much, Not all of the music was so great. And then, it was also a tumultuous time in the early to mid 70s with, Vietnam popping off and all of that, protests and stuff.
So Keith, you talk about the 80s music. Were you a hair band guy?
No, man. No. I was a surfer. Oh, a big hair band guy? No.
Yeah,
I was into new wave. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I got into country in like 86. That was my genre. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. What is the worst job you've ever had?
The worst job I ever had was after I retired. I moved here to north central Arizona. So we don't live in the desert. When people think of Arizona, they think about Phoenix and Tucson and scorpions and tumbleweeds and all that. We're actually a mile high elevation up in the mountains on what's called the Mogollon Rim. And I went to work for the county that I live in as a bailiff for the court system. In California, a bailiff is a law enforcement officer, a sworn peace officer, armed, who, keeps order in the courtroom, essentially. So I saw this bailiff position and I thought, oh, hey, I can do that. I interviewed, I got the job, and like from day one, I found out it is not what I had thought it was. I was a glorified court clerk. Most of my time was spent in a back office doing clerical work and organizing files and
Sure.
making phone calls to defendants because my judge wanted me to do that, the judge I was assigned to make sure the defendants were going to be present in court. And I lasted, I think about, 3 weeks. 3 weeks. At the end of my first week, I submitted my 2-week notice. I told my judge, this isn't for me. Why am I driving so far for very little pay when this isn't even, So they rewrote the job description and everything to reflect what you actually do.
Yeah. Wow. All right. You can watch a movie for the first time over again, like you never watched it before. Mm-hmm. So which movie is it? Which movie could you wish you could go back? Man, I wish I could watch it again.
Oh, man. That's a good question. Well, the first one that comes to mind is Top Gun, the new one. That was awesome. Better than the first one.
That's awesome.
And my wife actually enjoyed it. So I would love to go back and see that again, because each and every time you watch a film, you discover something new. One of my favorite films was Crimson Tide with Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington.
Great.
I've probably watched that thing 10 times.
It's still find something new.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of my favorite films. But the next one I watch again, it's going to be the new Top Gun, for sure.
Yeah, that's a great movie. That's in my top 15 already. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, barn burner of an 80s question for you to finish off the 5 questions. You can only pick one. Which one fits best for you?
Okay.
Karma Chameleon by Culture Club, Faith by George Michael, or any Foreigner song?
Probably Foreigner. I was never a George Michael fan or Culture Club.
Okay.
Yeah, Foreigner.
I'm creating your 80s profile now, so now I'm kind of
Yeah,
surfer, Foreigner. Okay, I got it. That was awesome. Keith, appreciate it, man. 5 questions.
Thank you, brother.
Oh, Keith, like I said, thank you so much for coming on the show. What a great chat, and great to be able to share your story and everything that you went through, and to show people that, you know what, when it gets that bad, you can be happy again.
You can. There is a solution.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. And just for our listeners, where's the best place to find you if they want to connect with you on social?
Probably LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. I have a public profile Facebook page, but it's the Gun Runner book page on Facebook.
All right, beautiful. And we're going to be looking forward in the next few weeks to follow up this interview with Mario Oliveira, who the Gun Runner was written about. So we'll be looking forward to that coming up. And thank you all for joining us. Have a great week, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Thanks, Chief.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Ryan.